Greetings, outcasts, freethinkers, narrative questioners, dot connectors, and genuinely open-minded and outright curious inhabitants of whatever realm we exist in at the moment. You are about to embark on another free first-hour episode of
The Melt.
If you find yourself wanting to dig deeper and have the desire to join the conversation during our monthly Melt meetups, you might want to consider becoming a monthly subscriber. For as little as 3 lousy Babylon hokey-pokey tokens per month, you can have access to full-length, early, and exclusive episodes. Just visit patreon.com/themeltpodcast or click the link in the episode notes to set the process in motion. It's simple, painless, and very well might make you feel tingly inside. So without further ado, please enjoy the show!
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Now, I'm a firm believer in the dynamic that would have it that some of the most unbelievable accounts that we come across in this realm may be the very same things that are allowed to exist uncontested because they never even make it to the spotlight of public scrutiny, precisely because of the high density of strangeness that they contain. The higher the strangeness, the more inscrutable they are to the masses. And these days, it seems that our society is continually expanding the scope of pejorative umbrella terms like conspiracy theory to include everything from what the mainstream news and social media outlets tell us isn't legit to more seemingly outlandish concepts such as Pizzagate and Flat Earth and altruism and politics. One topic that firmly fits under this umbrella is the secret space program. Today's guest, Tony Rodrigues, is here today to talk about that and his stint in the 20-year and back program and all that entailed. Hunter starts off the conversation by asking Tony how he realized that this had happened to him.
I always had memories. Like I was 10 when I was taken, and later that year, it lasted for a few months, but later on, 3 or 4 months later, I remembered the first being taken out of bed, like the first 10 or 15 minutes, the first 30 minutes of the encounter I remembered. And it didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense. It wasn't a dream. But whatever. So I brushed it up. What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with remembering it? So many thousands of people are out there that have the same thing there's nothing you can do until you get more memories. As I got older into my later teens, I started to have waking memories of service, of my time up there and things happening in Seattle. Like I had all these weird memories. And they were separate from memories. I say this quite often. They were separate than memories because in a dream, if you're dreaming that you're on a beach, you don't know how you got to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You simply know that you were on a beach. Then the dream immediately goes to the parking garage or the airplane, whatever is next in the dream. These were different because I could actually physically remember waking up that morning and showering and walking down a procession of a bunch of guys and getting dressed and getting up, brushing my teeth and getting on. Like I had all those components. So it was a memory, and I'm going, when could this have happened? Because I also had chronological memory of my life. So again, I just brushed it all off. So I had these kind of glimpses at what happened the whole time, but they didn't make any sense. And then in 2015, when I saw the Randy Kramer info, and he explained how the science works about, the 20 and back, how they can take you and then age regress you and put you back. And I went, what? Because the other thing is, by the time I was in my late 20s and kind of talked to people about it and verbalized what I remember, things I remembered, I just thought that I was taken many times. Mm-hmm. That in the middle of the night, they took me again because I was older, because I was a young kid. And then I remember being in Peru as a kid. And then I remember being on series as an older man in my 20s. And so I thought that I went more than once. And when he said that, I literally, and this was like right after MRI. And when he said that, I literally went, wait a minute. Like I sat back and I kind of exhaled and I went, that's what happened. That's what they did. They took me and they put me, I was gone for 20 years and they put me back that night. And then I went, that means that was real. And then all those glimpses that I had were in big doubt, that I always doubted. I had these huge, they were out of the ordinary, but I had sufficient doubt to ignore them. All of a sudden that doubt was removed and I went, that's what happened. And then this process of just unpacking, like all of it just unpacked. I mean, this was May of 2015, like the second week of May, like May 10th of 2000, like in one day. And I probably got 2/3 of all the memories kind of coalesced. It came together enough to where I had a story. And then that was during the day. I got up and then my kids were young. I went to dinner, didn't say a word to anybody. And I sat there and we watched a movie, the family, we watched a movie that night. The next day I woke up again. I'm going, this is crazy. There's too much here. And so I went and started to find the places. And when the first place I found was Puerto Tawantinsuyo, Peru. I went to Google Earth and I said, well, if it's there, and then it was, not only was it there, but it was exactly how I remembered it. And this is somewhere that I'd never looked at before in my life on a map.
Sure.
And I zoomed in and I remember I had physical memories of fishing, of living, walking in the rain, the birds. Like Crazy. It was more like I looked at it from Google Earth and I'm going, oh my God. And at that point, that's when I kind of lost my shit. That's when I saw it in physical reality. So that's another thing that's different from me and other people that, and I say claim to have been through the same thing. I don't doubt anybody, but a lot of people don't have that luxury of I was the first 6 to 8 years on Earth in that time and then shipped off into space. Most people are taken and shipped off, or they're somewhere that they never, somewhere secret that they never get to come out of again. And so then I found Seattle. Then I thought, the house in Seattle. And I went there and I looked around and it took me, the better part of 30 minutes. And when I saw it, there was a very distinct layout of the backyard and the swimming pool. And oh my God, there it is. And like not only those memories, because seeing it was a stamp on it.
Right.
But memories of when I was a kid in my real life in the same years, parallel. When I was 12 and 13, I lived in a place, we had a public swimming pool that we went to. And I always had this I was like, why do I remember? I would wake up in the morning and remember a different pool that I went to in the summertime. All the kids in the neighborhood, we went to the pool every day. That's where we met. We went and rode our bicycles. We hung out, and this was back in the 80s. And I said, why do I remember a different pool? I always remembered I'd wake up in the morning and I'd remember hanging out with guys in a different shaped pool. And then all of a sudden, and here we are in 2015, I go on Google Earth back to where I had these memories and I zoom in and there's the pool that I remembered back then too, in the flesh, so to speak. And that at that point I knew I needed help. That was the giant flare gun that went off that said, I need to talk to somebody else about this. I don't know how to process this. And I did look in the book for counseling, and I got halfway through the phone book and I went, man, they're going to medicate me. They don't have an answer for this. There's no professional answer for this right now.
So did you first start having visual memories? Were they physical or were they auditory?
Well, think about they were visual. I mean, absolutely visual. These are clear memories of mine. So, I mean, imagine if you guys we were just talking, I don't know if this is going to make it on air, but we were just talking about you guys took a road trip, right? So imagine not remembering that. And then next year, just getting the memories back all at once of the same experience of where you're at now with it. It was not only that, it was like years of experience packed on, of things came, and I didn't realize it at the time, nor did my family. But over the next 6 months to a year, I really integrated a lot of it, and I changed. My personality changed. Like all of a sudden, I didn't have access to so much technical data as I had access to emotional experience, and I changed. My personality not completely changed, but I changed. A lot of the ways I had been living, the goals that I had in life, totally kind of fell to the wayside. And I walked away from a lot of things because I had access, and I still kind of draw on the things that I learned during that time versus what I just had in my own life.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that was I guess the big the big effect from when I got the memories back. And like you said, visual, they're all kinds. Some of them are harder to get than others, admittedly so. And I really craved for other people to come forward. I went and met people that were other whistleblowers, and I wanted them to remind me of things.
Right.
So just because you don't remember it doesn't mean the memory's not there. It's just you need to be reminded of it.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So I always wanted somebody else to just talk and remind me of things, but it turned out that early on, a lot of guys that came forward caught a lot of ridicule, and other guys that were already established that were making money started pointing fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody wasn't as friendly as I had assumed once I had substantiated a few facts. The other thing is, to talk about it publicly, I had to substantiate some facts, and I had to have something pan out. Something had to play out in my favor. Hello.
A magically appearing cup of coffee. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes they're olfactory memories. So you'll smell something that will trigger something in the brain because that's the strongest sense memory that we have. Did you ever have an experience like that where you'd smell something and it triggered a thought or a memory?
So, I don't talk about it specifically in the book because the exact island next to Seattle that there's a lot of smells. There's a smell of Ceres colony that I remember, it's like a machine kind of smell. It's a chemical, but I haven't smelled it anywhere since, but I can remember that there was a tinge of smell. When I went, so in 2016, so of course, when I in the early time after my memories, I had to prove it to myself. I still kind of have that. Like, if I go for a week or two in my normal life,
Mm-hmm.
I have a family, I have a home, I mow my lawn, I have a career, I'm a woodworker. And so I can forget about all of it, right? It's very easy to just forget about those years and get on with my normal life that isn't so bad. I like to say I'm happy. And when I go, oh, I got an interview tonight, and I go, it all happened again. And then for the first few years, it's like I want to doubt it and go, man, it just doesn't make sense. But then I kind of replay the evidence in my head and and I go, man, there's just no way that I can, turn my back on it. It's just I did not want to take it to the grave, put it that way. But there's just so much of it. And I had to prove it to myself. And to get back to your question, I'm sorry to be so long-winded about this.
No, please go for it.
Yeah.
Part of the proof, I thought, man, I got a hold of a friend to go to Peru, a friend that I knew that was born in Peru. And I said, please take me. Let's go. I need to go to this town. And he said, I'd love to. That'd be awesome. And then he was like, he checked into it for a couple of days. He got back and he said, under no way you go to that town. He's like, even me. He's like, there's illegal gold mining. There's cocaine farming. He's like, that is you don't go to that river town. He's like, we will get killed. The illegal gold miners there will kill us. We cannot go there. And I was like kind of crushed because out of the entire places that I remembered on the earth, that's where I wanted to go the most. I identified that during the 20 years as home.
Yeah.
So my second bet was to go to the house in Seattle, and I booked and I went there and I drove to the home. But it's one of the islands around Seattle you got to take a ferry to get to. And right at the ferry ramp while you're waiting, I rolled the window down and I went, oh, wow. And I could smell it. It's kind of like that part of Seattle. I don't know, what the bay is called, but it's kind of lakey. It doesn't smell like the ocean. It smells more like a lake. And that smell was there, and it really unpacked a lot. Like, the other thing was that trip, I knew my way around the island. I knew places. I went into the store that we always went to. There was a candy bin, and the store, I mean, it unchanged, and it was 30 years after the fact of how, and it had progressed. Like I had seen places that I'm like, oh wow, that I had the sensation like that's new.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't there before. I knew that, and so those memories were like freakishly. And at that point, that was when I lost all fear of talking about it publicly, and I thought this is enough to where if somebody really comes out and it's like, if I get on, let's say, and do an interview on a show and they're very skeptical and they just beat me up, they just kick my ass.
Mm-hmm.
They still can't explain that. No one can explain what I went through in Seattle, and I documented it. I had a researcher on the phone. I was doing pictures. Like I was careful about it. And so no matter what, if I'm wrong about anything, I was not wrong about that island, Seattle. In fact, I was freakishly accurate. About my memories on that island in that area. And so I have to trust the rest of them. That's why I'm not afraid to talk, because they're tall tales, like it's pretty hard to get your head around.
Intense
really.
stuff for sure.
Well, Tony, you would have to be a savant in terms of memory to be able to keep track of all of this. And I think that's one of the things that corroborates your story is the fact that your story doesn't change. Like you don't change the details. It's kind of like, in your childhood, these intense moments that happen, you can remember specifically because there's trauma there. So it's embedded in your DNA. It's like you can't make that up, So I think that's one thing that reinforces what you're saying.
It's true. And people, so recently, and I forget, there was a show that came out and they kind of compared people that like me, they're coming out and talking, and they say that there was a write-up and they were like, I'm the one that out of everybody is the most linear. So my story is the most linear. It's from A, B, and that I think that's really translated into why the book has done well, because it's a story and it's complicated because a lot of people have a hard time with the time travel aspects of it. And I do try to explain it my best in the book, but it's linear. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. And then it sorts out. And a lot of people, whistleblowers, like I said, don't have the luxury of finding the house they were in or going to a place that they stayed on the earth. Like they were swept away, and they have a host of memories that get lost in the order.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
they tell the story, they have things, but they're non-linear. So a lot of the people that have very credible accounts of being taken into the same types of program and the same technologies don't have the linear speaking. So, I don't know if to be proud of it. I kind of expected more people like myself, and I'm kind of disappointed that there's not a lot more people with the level of memory that I have.
So you said that you were listening to somebody talk about their 20 and back experience. So this stuff was kind of on your radar before, right? Like you were drawn to this sort of subject matter?
Yes. So the other thing was, I like at a young age, when I was 16 or 17, the initial abduction, the first 30 minutes, like I said, the first 15 to 30 minutes of seeing a gray ET in my room, being kind of zapped by it, and then being carried out of my room by reptilians. I always remembered that. I always had those memories. And I tried, back then, I mean, there's no internet. So I tried my best to try to research it. And there was nothing available for me as a kid. That I was broke, and you go to the library. There's nothing there, so you really have to. It's hit and miss on the bookstores in ufology. If you're in an area that has a bookstore that's very open to it, you can have access to some of the great work that's been done researching it. But I didn't, and so I had to give up, and I went into religious texts. I said, well, they got to be in the Bible. There's got to be explained in the Bible, and nothing. And I didn't. There's like, tinges, but I read in my early 20s, I kind of read all the religious texts looking for a common denominator and looking for ETs. And it was Chan Buddha was really the only one that, out of all the ones that I read that really had a openly accepted life in the cosmos was Chan Buddha. They were the only ones that were like matter of fact about it. And there was nothing. So what I would do is just go back to my life, and then 3 or 4 or 5 years later, I'd pop my head up and look into research ufology and see if it changed. Grab an Inquirer out of the store shelf
Yeah.
a few years later and see if any, because I was looking for things that I remembered specifically. I was looking for another account that was basically the same kind of thing that I went through, and I was always researching it. I really had a hard time when I saw the is it Wesley Stryber? Am I saying his name right?
Whitley Strieber, yeah.
Whitley. Whitley. Yes. When I saw that movie late night, in the middle of the night one night, and they have a very good depiction of the same reptilians that I remember. It's like very close. So that was something that was hard for me to digest, and I didn't have my memories back. Like I said, these are things that I was always looking for to try to solve, to get an answer for what I remember I couldn't. And then when I got my memories back, then of course it all made sense. But yes, there were a few people that came out before me. And in the beginning, so I contacted some researchers, and I worked with 3 people that were researchers in the very beginning to try to prove my story, to get proof. And there for a while, there were people coming out like every week. Like I would be emailing back and forth. And then I'd go, and I would remember, because it's okay to remember working on a ship in space, but that's not you. How do you prove it, right?
Exactly.
You need to remember working on a ship in space and then visiting somewhere on Earth specifically, or having some kind of tangible thing specifically that can be connected or overlapped with something else that has proof, that yields something that that you shouldn't have known. And every time I would come up with one, I would look, and there would be an interview, like just that week, the news would get broken. Like, yes, there are bases around Jupiter, and I was missing them. I was missing them by just a few hours sometimes.
Crazy. And
then finally, I came out and said, when he asked me about the ship that I worked on, that it was a converted old World War II submarine. But the first ship for the Ceres Colony Corp that I worked on was an old submarine. Like, we were in the bottom deck and a half of a submarine, and the thing that I always couldn't forget was the threshold and the doors that you'd walk over. And we'd always be in a hurry, and every day. I remember going for a long period of time of always hitting my shins tripping on the threshold. It's the big door with the round, handles that you could close it. They had those doors, and we had to step up. And if you were ever in a hurry or with your hands full, so you always tripped there. The second ship that I worked on had a threshold, but much shorter. It went down to like 2 inches. So it was easy to get in and out. And so I always remember that. And when I was describing the ship, and then I must have said that just a few weeks or a month prior to 2 other guys that had evidence as well that supported it. So I was first with that. So that was something that it was a shred of evidence that I brought to the subject matter that proved me. Since then, I've had a ton of things that checked out, that panned out. Well, not a ton, but I've had some pretty good substantiating evidence. So that worked out, and that is almost a little disappointing. I got to say that my account was, I did hard labor. I did slavery, and I was abused very badly. I was not treated with a great deal of respect as a human being for whatever I was classified as. And so to be perfectly honest with everybody, there's a huge part of me that wishes that I would get proven wrong, and that didn't happen, that all the abuse that I went through, that there would be some other reason for why I remember the negative things happening to me. And but it doesn't happen. Every time I come close to something, it either checks out or still leaves the door open. I haven't had anything that flew directly in the face of what I've remembered. I don't know if you guys are aware, but a guy named Brad Olson, who wrote the esoteric series, Beyond Esoteric. Brad Olson's the author. He's been on the History Channel about it. He's really, anyhow, we were at a convention in Vegas, and when he met, and we sat and talked, and he was impressed, by my information. And we talked about Inyokern, because that was the first stop that I was at, was Inyokern. And it was on the way home for him. When he drove back from Vegas, he kind of made a detour, went through Ridgecrest, and drove to the airport. Because I told him that I couldn't go to Peru. because it's very dangerous. It's perilous to go there. And I did go to Seattle, and the last place that I have up my sleeve is Inyokern. So he went there, and he called me in the middle of the day. I was at work, and I had to step outside and go there, and he FaceTimed me, and he said, now describe the place. He's like, I'm standing in the driveway. He's like, look. And he was kind of being skeptical too, not in a combative way, but he was kind of had me under a microscope to see. And I said, I described it, and I said, the doors are like hanging. They're rolling doors, like barn doors that hang. Can you see them? And I said, what are they, like 20 feet tall? And he said, no. He showed me a picture, and he said, they're like 10 feet tall. Because I was 10 years old when I was there.
Right.
So everything was bigger to me.
Yes,
sure.
So he said, I'm going to walk up to the gate now. And I said, there's a bridge there, and it's like 6 feet down, and it's a dried creek bed, and there's big rocks that are rounded off that are like the size of a grapefruit. I said, those are coming up. And he got up to the bridge. The bridge was like 2 feet above the dirt.
Uh-huh.
And there was no rocks. He said, I'm sorry, there's no, I said, I said, look, I know that those rocks are there. I remember it because when we would drive in, I'd look out the window and we have to wait. And I would look down and think that those rocks were neat. I wanted one, or that because they're out of place. It's in the desert.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, I don't see any rocks here. I said, okay. He said, well, I can't get in. I'm going to walk up to the gate. He walked up another 20 feet, and there were the rocks he said, whoa, there they are. Whoa. And so in that trip, there was a bit of corroboration, just little stuff like that. I mean, if it pans out, it pans out. You can't turn your back on it. So if I'm wrong, and, you look at me and anything else that may explain, however you could explain how I know the things I know, you still have to explain that away.
Exactly.
You have to explain that phenomenon away. And so I was moved by that. Like, I still want to go there. There's a long story about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I still want to go to Inyokern and just kind of breeze through. I'd like to ride away from it, just for that little boy that I was when I was there. I'd like to escape. I'd like to ride away on my own accord, rather than how I was taken out of there the first time.
Exactly. Yeah, I can imagine, like you gave the example of, say, we, a year from now, we forgot that we went to LA on our road trip, but that would be a memory that would be kind of funny. But the memories you're talking about sort of flooding in, a lot of them aren't not only not funny, but they're pretty horrific and hard and painful. When all of that was coming back to you, did you feel like either you were going nuts, or like, what the fuck, where are these very real seeming memories coming from? Did you accept them as real immediately, or did you think something was seriously wrong with you?
No, I didn't know. I wanted something to be, like I said, I wanted something to be wrong.
Sure.
I wanted them to say, look, this is you, whatever, you hit your head, here's a pill. Go back to life. Go back to your life. Simple, yeah. And I wanted to go back into the matrix, so to speak. Because not only did I remember being abused in ways, but I remember the real command structure of the world. And so I saw some people that were, people that had access, people that owned me. I was owned, for one. So slavery was real. I had remembrance. So our world that we're told we live in with freedom isn't exactly correct.
Exactly.
I witnessed high-level Satanism and ritual human sacrifice for the people that owned me. And that's a culture that's real. And it was a culture it was a society, and they were very practiced at what they were doing. So it wasn't new to them. They weren't figuring it out. They were very established. The calendar worked like clockwork. They knew exactly, they had an answer for every situation that arose. So they'd been at it a long time. So that was disappointing. So these are things that I didn't want to be real.
Yeah.
So when I got my memories back, it wasn't that I thought I was crazy. It's just that I thought that this was bad news for the world, that this is the world that we live in. And now all of a sudden, it was like a fall from grace for me to remember the things, and then to kind of process the fact that I had been through those things. Like, I was God, I'm a man, I'm a grown man. I had a little bit of pride about myself, and then to look through it and remember what I went through and how I suffered that. It was very difficult. The thing was, I really don't have it in me to censor my story. So a lot of people say, why didn't you just not talk about it in the first place? And I thought, well, I was so desperate.
Yeah.
I still am. I'm always desperate for people because it's very unbelievable to really listen to me and say that I worked in space on a UFO for 12 years,
For sure.
you know? And so when I say that, it's very hard for the average person to believe that. And so I'm very open about everything. So I just kind of throw all the information, at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And the abuse and the Satanism and the sexual abuse, all that stuff is evidence. And so I had to produce that as well. And I just, like I said, I don't have it in me. I sat down for my very first interview and he goes, do you want to make an alias real quick before you go on here? I mean, that way you can protect your name. And I thought I couldn't think of anything cool. So
Mr. X.
I said, no, yeah, I couldn't do any of that. I thought, no, that's dumb. I can't do it. I just can't. And truthfully, I go by Tony's my middle name.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I've always gone by that. Like I've always been called Tony my whole life because my dad and I have the same name.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, I just didn't have it in me to censor out some of the early stuff and or to change my name or make some kind of alias in the beginning. So I just rolled with it. And once it was out, it was too late. It was, my very first interview, I told the whole story and it was too late, even though I believe some things did get censored out of that interview. And I was on Gaia. I was in season 13 of Cosmic Disclosure on those episodes.
Yeah.
And they filmed 4 episodes. They cut 1 out. Of the darker stuff. They just basically the entire time in Seattle, they cut it out and they just wanted to talk about space, which is a shame because there's a lot of evidence there.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm all about presenting an evidence. Like I said, not everybody has the luxury that I do of evidence. And so I feel like it's kind of a responsibility to present it to people that don't believe it. If I have evidence, then, if there's 5 whistleblowers or experiencers in one room and there's a bunch of skeptics in the other room, we have to send the one in with the evidence.
Right.
And I know that I have enough evidence to where like I said, they can beat me up and beat me over the head with anything, but there's so many things they can't explain away. You can't explain Peru away,
Exactly.
and you can't explain Seattle away. You can explain Mars and say, oh, well, you can't breathe on Mars and NASA's there. Okay. Well, explain Peru then. How do I know my way around Peru? How do I know my way around Seattle that well? How did I know that Ceres had salt deposits on it? How did I know that? And there's a lot of things. They're just little things, no silver bullet.
Sure. So I want to go back to the beginning with this kid that read your mind. In your timeline, you came back after you'd been gone for many years, and was this kid still in your school? Did you interact with him? Did he behave differently toward you? Like, what was that like?
He felt sorry for me. He was aware of what I went through, and he felt sorry for me. And it was in April. It was at the end of the school year. So he spoke to me again, and there were other kids that were there. And then he didn't finish the school year. I don't think he left earlier. But he changed. He didn't like me still.
He just had pity for you.
He was no longer angry with me. He felt sorry for me. He asked me, do you feel okay? Because what happened was, interestingly, this is funny. I met his dad in school on a Wednesday. We had the science fair on a Wednesday.
Right.
And his dad came in and was the judge for the science fair.
Mm-hmm.
And Thursday they took me. I know because I went to school the one day. So I didn't have these memories as clearly in the beginning, but the more I thought about it, the more you figure it out and go, wait a minute, I went to school because I was really totally discombobulated. I was totally in a shock the next day. Even I had no reason. I had no memory of why. I had no idea why I was out of place, but I was completely not reintegrating into my life. I was stunned, kind of walking through life. Anyhow, I met his dad on a Wednesday. I was taken on a Thursday night, and I got up and went to school Friday morning. And I'd been gone for 20 years. I'd lived from the age of 10 till 30. Jesus. As an adult. I had several careers. I'd been abused. I'd been in slave work, hard labor. I had fallen in love. I had long-term relationships with women. And I had been to other galaxies. I'd traveled in space on a UFO and to Earth as well. And that emotional experiences came back with me the next day. And I was immediately attracted to adult women. And I had no idea why. I was 10 years old. I didn't have access to pornography or something. It's not like I was, you know what I'm saying, watching, had access. I had no idea what sexuality really was. And all of a sudden I was sexually attracted to adults. I had no idea what was going on, why that was. But that was on a Friday. And then our next meeting for the Talented and Gifted program was the following Wednesday. And it was then he said, "Are you okay?" I went to school that Friday and I had forgotten where the bathroom was.
Wow.
And it's a small school. It was a B class school, but the bathroom was like literally right across the hall. And I raised my hand to go to the bathroom. It was like in the afternoon. And I asked the teacher, and the whole class laughed at me. "Tony, you're not funny." I said, "No, I'm serious. Where is the bathroom?" I forgot where it was. And I had forgotten my way around my house, things around my house. So the teacher called and said I called my mom and asked if I had amnesia, if I was okay. She was concerned. She was like, "He had amnesia. This is unexplainable." And so all the kids in school talked about it too. And the next Wednesday in the meeting, that kid that you asked about said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I was still very defensive. "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" And he said, "They said you had amnesia." And he looked concerned. By the look at his demeanor, he was not aggressive. He was, he knew what happened is what it was. He was aware.
Maybe for the listeners who aren't familiar with how all of this got set in motion, perhaps you can just summarize what began this whole deal.
1982, I was in Southern Michigan. Went to school, and I was in the Talented and Gifted program, fourth grade, and 10 years old. And there was a kid that came to school for that school year. It's all in the book. A lot of the details.
Yeah, sure.
We didn't get along. He was a very smart kid. I was very jealous. I was competitive, and I was cocky. And I would pick on him, and he would pick on me. And one day he said, "My dad's an Illuminati. What's your dad do?" And I had no idea what he was talking about, but he was very condescending about everything. And he was a very smart kid, but he was a very selfish, self-centered kid.
Sure.
So I didn't care. I didn't like him. And then we had that in April of that year, his dad came in and was the judge for the science fair. I guess he had a lot of credentials, scientific credentials that, our teacher was really like blown away. I heard her talking about how overqualified this guy was. And he pointed me out to him in the science fair when we were setting up in the morning. "That's the kid I told you about, Dad. It's the kid that ruined my confidence." And the next day I was taken for 20 years of slavery into a secret space program, into black projects, and by ETs.
So
showed up in our room and took me.
So you ruined his confidence because he was talking to some girls and you came into the room and the girls said, "He can read your mind." And you had a thought, "You're the ugliest kid I've ever seen." And he read your mind.
And none of these girls are ever going to want to go out with you.
And it eroded his confidence.
I walked in early to the Talented and Gifted class. It was in the library on Wednesday mornings. And I was there early, and 6 or 7 other kids were there early, and he was one of them. They were sitting around a couch in the library, and they were all laughing. And I walked up, "What's going on?" And the one girl said, "He can read your mind." And of course I did not believe it. And at the time, and so as kids do, kids are brutal with each other, honest. And I said the cruelest thing in my mind that I could think of, because like I said, at the point we were rivals.
Yeah.
Right.
And the look on his face was that he understood. He got very straight faced and very disappointed. And, he was kind of like, having a great time. And I thought to myself in the back of my head, like, "You're the ugliest kid I've ever seen. And none of these girls are ever going to grow up and want to be with you. You're going to be, don't even bother." And I was thinking that. And I said, go ahead and tell him what I thought. And he didn't say anything. But after that, he absolutely hated me. He wouldn't give me the time of day. And there was no. The other thing is, young boys, I don't know if it's everybody, but we used to be really mean to each other
Sure.
and turn around and be friends the next day.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Like we were boys. We were young
Mhm.
boys, and he held his grudge. He held his grudge against me. I thought that you know what I mean? We would pick on each other and we'd be friends. I offered friendship, you know, but he didn't have that. He didn't have that. He had probably been through the same program, and probably looking back on it was much older than his years would suggest as well, but he
Yeah.
would have kept his memories and not been deleted, not had his memories deleted like I did.
And maybe
After going through the same kind of thing.
maybe his mind reading had something to do with that. Like that's something that was residual.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You know, he talked a lot of weird stuff in school, and but he was very much aware of the bigger world, how the world worked, and us kids were not, and it was obvious.
Yeah.
He was very aware of how the world worked, and there were times he would always correct the teacher on things, and there was a back and forth between him and the teacher, and we were 10 years old, so it was very out of the ordinary, that whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever tried to find him again? Like, do you know kind of it?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure he works in Hollywood. I did find him. And it's funny is before I got my memories back, it was in the days of Yahoo, when everybody had Yahoo Mail. When was that? 2005, 2004. So it was early on. So I always remembered that I was taken, and remembered the conversations that he and I had. And I would remember when I said that I would poke my head up every so often and research.
Mm-hmm.
One year I poked my head up and I thought about him, and I researched, and I found his email, and I emailed him. And I asked him, did you ever go to, you know, my school in Michigan? Because if you did, I think we've met and we may be friends. And he said, nope, I've never been there, but I know it was him. I know the name, and I found his picture. It's him. He said, no, I've never went there. Why? And I said, because I thought we might have been friends, and we didn't end on a good note. I just wanted to apologize if I did anything inappropriate. If if I remember you correctly, we didn't end on good terms, and I just wanted to apologize and say that I regretted being, you know, whatever. I was hoping to get information. I was hoping to, you know what I'm saying? Like I was trying for, I was desperate for information at the time back then.
Yeah, yeah.
But he's, you know, and thank you for your time, and that was it. And whatever. There are other people that I've remembered that I had contact with in Yokern and in Seattle that panned out, that turned out to be true, just like I described them before we found them.
Wow.
But they have family members that are still alive, and there are people that are still alive, and some of them are still very influential. And so I don't publicly say names.
Sure.
I have shared all the names with, you know, when you talk about the child trafficking and things, like there are high crimes that I witnessed, and I have turned those on to certain authorities. I've been contacted by organizations in the past after my story was, you know, public.
Sure.
And so, I mean, I don't want to go down a whole different road of conversation if I can help it, but I have turned on the information to where it would do any good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but I don't go around saying the names, because also if there are people affiliated with those people, like, you know, their kids, and then I say something and then they get bombarded, you know, it's not fair to people that may not be involved too. I hope I'm not making some kind of excuse, but that's just how I feel. And then I have a family of my own and things to think about for my own. I don't want to go and poke a hornet's nest if I can help it.
For sure. And so you're talking about looking at people that were more the perpetrators. Have you come across anybody that was in the same programs as you were? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That have very fragmented, very minor amount of memories. I met a few people that I met up there. One person is in the book, like an African-American boy that was on the moon. There was an incident in the book, and he got a hold of me early on. Like in the first year that my story went public, he saw one of my interviews and he got a hold of me.
Wow.
And he described, it was, I don't want to say it was shocking, but it was surreal to have somebody describe a memory of being on the moon exactly how I remembered it, because he was there too. and it was an interaction. And he was very young. I was probably right around 20 years old, and so I had been in the secret program, maybe more, 22, right in there, 20 to 22 in those years. And he was like 8 or 9, and he had been taken. And he described it exactly like I remembered it. So, and I had never told a soul about what happened between us. So there was absolutely no way he could have known, and took a lucky guess. And not only that, but the emotions were the same. Like, he was still mad about it, about what had happened. He was upset. And anyhow, so that's, and then I get maybe one a month, or every other month, women, they go, "Hey, it's me. I was Marie, the love interest at the end of the book."
Right.
Women, "No, it's me." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I don't think it was you." And then they get upset, they get mad. But it happens quite often where they say that they were Marie and they were in love with me. And
right.
I know better. So it's hard to, it's hard to take that away from somebody if they're on. I feel like the long-term memory, the human mind works, and it's kind of elastic. So especially when memories are suppressed or deleted, and then you begin to remember, it'll connect the dots, and not necessarily in the right order. So it connects dots. And I think people have something happen, they go through that, and they see my account, and their memory is similar. So it connects the dots and go, "I'm that girl," or "I'm that guy that was you that you're talking about."
Yeah.
Right.
And that kind of happened. And I think some people that are coming out now that speak publicly are the same thing. Like you said earlier, how my story is the same always, and other people's changed, is because they're not done remembering. And they're kind of grasping, and there's nothing to jog your memory because it was in a secret place. Yeah. You're never going to see a picture of it. You're never going to see the smell. You're never going to go somewhere and smell it again.
Right.
You're not going to hear somebody talk that way. You know what I mean? It's a secret world that is up, either infrastructure that is in space or below the surface in underground places. So they're never going to get those memories jogged properly. And so your memory, especially long term, is very elastic and can connect dots. And I think that happens a lot. And it's a shame because there's a lot of people that have some very credible things, but it's hard for them to be taken seriously because I think a lot of it is, can be picked apart easily too, because they're grasping at straws. The memory process is very difficult.
Did you find any scarring on your body when you were a child that wasn't consistent with any injuries that you had in this timeline?
The next morning I had marks on me. My mom said I had marks on the back of my neck, like so a mark. But no, for the most part, no. There were times I believe that I was taken again in a follow-up sense. Like, they put you through the program, the initial procedure, and you go for the 20 and back. And then they wait 6 months and they come and follow up and they check to make sure that you're going to stay forgetting or whatever's going to happen, that you're not going crazy.
Right.
And that way they'd have to intervene. And so I remember a few other times that I feel I was abducted. And I remember that they would do things to me, procedures, and they would give me something, and they explained that it would heal the cut overnight. Completely heal me. And I remember that those days, coincidentally, I'd wake up in the morning not feeling terrible, but actually feeling awesome, more than I should. I'd wake up and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and actually have being on kind of high, from whatever they gave me that healed me real quick. Basically, they would take me and they would do a quick surgery,
right,
and then they would give me something to make it heal quickly. And I think that many other people have described the same experience to me. So they have.
You made an interesting point that I wanted to touch on when you were talking about your mom and the school contacting your mother. Did your parents notice any discernible change in your personality when you came back?
My dad and I were never the same again. And he would say it all the time. "What happened to you? I want my son back. What happened to you?" That summer, so that was in April, and then school got out and we did a road trip to Vermont to see friends of the family. We stayed in Vermont that summer. And my dad said it all the time. He said, "You changed, son." He's like, "I don't know what is going on, but I want my son back." Like my sense of humor changed, everything. My personality changed. And it's something, a 10-year-old kid, they can have a personality change. Most people won't notice because they were 10. They're like, "Okay, there you go. Here, I gave you a ball, go play."
Yeah.
Right.
And so you're not exactly in the conversation often enough for people to realize that. But my mom and dad both did remark on it. And then my dad and I really have never got along since the same. One thing when I look back on those years, it's funny because it's like you're mining the info of the 10 being 10, those
Sure.
early years. Most people that I do interviews, they want to hear about lasers and gravity, spaceships and stuff. But when I think about that time at 10 years old, so there's a car going by. To think about being 9 years old is an incredibly distant, there's a huge distance there. So for me to think back right now in my chronological life on Earth, and, I still live in Michigan. When I think back to 10 years old, it's a short distance. And then when I think back to my 7th birthday was like a mark, like an unforgettable thing. When I was 7, the entire family came. They threw a big party. I don't know if you ever knew what Farrell's was, the ice cream parlor.
Yeah.
Was a chain. So I went to Farrell's on my 7th birthday, and I still have the cup. I still have the big swig. Like I kept it my whole life. That's 1,000 years ago for me. The experience of remembering that is so much farther than 10 years old. It's a strange phenomenon that I try to explain to people because I think it's an evidence, because it's something that somebody else is going to feel the same thing sometime elsewhere. It's a fact. And but the way that I experienced it was I experienced from birth till 10. And then that 20 years that I was taken happened first.
Yeah.
I didn't experience it at the same time or anything. Like it happened first. And then I went back and I was already that old, packed back into my 10-year-old body, and then experienced my life. So to think about 9 years old or 8 or 7 years old it's another 20 years. It's 50 years ago for me instead of 30.
Yeah.
Or instead of 40 years that
Right.
it should be. It's hard to explain, but the experience of it, the experience of it, of what's going on when if you think back, most people can remember, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can remember your 21st birthday. So I always kind of bring it back. I get a lot of memory work that people that I work with, I do consultation about it. And everybody can remember their 21st birthday because you had a big celebration. You could drink now. And it's a long time ago. And that experience, now, if you think about your 20th birthday and it feels like it was 20 years prior to that, that's kind of what it's like. And I think that's something that's important for the phenomenon for other people that go through it. And a lot of people have contacted me that claim that they've gone through the same thing. And a lot of them have pretty good substantiating circumstantial evidence. So when one or two things kind of line up, you take notice. But when some people have 7, 8, 9 things that line up that are circumstantial, that point in the direction that they went through the same thing. So I'm like, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Do you think there's any generational element that they take families or maybe members of the same family?
Absolutely. That is absolutely right. Because once a lot of the technology is genetic. There's based on your genetics, and it's not so much they tell a lot of people that are in the military programs, they tell them that it's racially genetic. So that there's no black people or there's no brown people up there. And that's not true. That's not the case whatsoever. The deal is that the way that they control the trauma-based or the Randy Kramer called it with the grain mind control, the mind control that they use is a completely different method between different racial groups.
Interesting.
But the genetics to go are very important, and not everybody can go. So, if they disclose and say, these are the space program, for whatever reason, I don't know how the technology works, but not everybody can go. Not everybody can go through the wormhole or the portal that they make to travel the great distances. Some people will be hurt very badly because they don't have the genetics that can handle that, whatever takes place, whatever the transaction of energy happens. And so it's based on your genetics, or it's the time travel aspect when they go to put you back. So not everybody has the genetics to go. And so once they find somebody that does, they keep an eye on their whole family. And so it's very likely that your kids are going to go and your grandkids. And, you said earlier, the other thing I noticed is that people that are taken in the 80s, so I guess these programs, other researchers have found the paperwork, the money trail for these programs and it really took off right around 1980, 79, 80, like Congress began shoveling money into a black hole of a black project. It's when it began, was in 80. And that I was taken in 82. And when I went to the base of the moon, I remember smelling wet paint on the walls. Like it was freshly built. They were still putting carpet in there.
Yeah.
And so there was a big expansion. And I think that the technology for deleting people's memories wasn't as great. So people that are taken in the 90s and later on the 2000 have seem to have a much slimmer chance of getting a full recall. They remember a few really bullet points, but they don't have a ton of memory because I think the technology wears off over time. A, wears off over time and hasn't had time to wear off yet. And B, is just got improved. They got better at it.
Exactly.
And that's what we're seeing. So, but I absolutely, and probably they've been taking us one fact, not so much us from the 80s, because it's us taking people in the 80s. It's humans, military projects or corporate projects. But before that, ETs have probably been taking us the whole time. Our entire history, we've probably been being abducted. The boogeyman under your bed, the sky is falling. All these old things. The ancient alien theory is so buried in evidence. There's just a mountain of evidence behind it. And then you look at the folklore and the stories about it. There have been ETs taking kids, and the devil steals your soul and puts you back.
Yeah, fairy abductions.
So you know what I mean, like right back to the very beginning of right into the biblical scriptures.
Right.
It's like the same. They're talking about taking your soul, and I really feel that the technology used that they used to take me was cloning me and then taking my consciousness out of me into the clone. And then I lived for those 20 years, and then they put the clone back in time and they can just kill it. And my consciousness naturally returns to the original body only a few minutes after I was taken. The thing that leads me to believe that the most is that when I woke up, after the first procedure, when I woke up, I had no memory of my life prior to that. I had amnesia, complete amnesia. When I woke up in Inyokern, my very first stop, and I lived for those 20 years, I'd never had memory of mom and dad or my family, nothing. And then at the end of it all, I had no memory of those 20 years, but I got my memories. It was like they took my consciousness out of that body that had those memories of being in Ceres and being in Seattle and all those. And then they put me back in my original body, and I didn't have, and now these memories were back. I remembered my mom. I remembered where I was, like the hard drive. It was like they took me out and put me into two different hard drives. And so that's why I believe that cloning is involved, and it would settle a lot of the, why are there two of you at the same time? Because really, I was in Seattle in the 80s, in 85 and 86, and I was in Michigan in 85 and 86 at the same time. So there were two of me. And it's important to say I'm speculating how all that works the best I can.
I've never heard you put it exactly that way before. What do you mean by there were two of you? There was you lying in the bed, sort of in a suspended state of animation, and then the cloned you was...
Well, no, I was right back the next morning and got up and went to school. So I went through the 80s and in southern Michigan and lived my life. But also I was in Seattle in southern Michigan and in Seattle, Washington at the same time. I was listening to the same music I was watching the same movies that came out. I was like a foster child. So it really, when I think about it, I could have met myself.
Yeah.
So there's a technology there. There were two of me. Another thing that I've said before, and it's kind of hard to explain it, and feel like I finished explaining it, is that at the end of it, before that, before I was taken, I was a straight A student.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the top 5% of the school. So I was in advanced learning. The day after, I completely withdrew from school, and it was the end of the school year, and I'd already amassed really good grades. So I finished out that school. I withdrew. I quit doing my work, but I had already done so well through the school year that I had good grades. The following year is when I became a D&E student, and it stayed with me until I dropped out of school. Like, I lost the ability to concentrate. I was really emotionally a wreck. And then going into high school and my early 20s, I was a severe emotional wreck, and I never had any kind of real relationships. I couldn't put together relationships with women or with some of my friends. I was just not. I had emotional problems, and I was sane. I had plenty of friends, and I remember sitting with my friends going, "I don't know what's wrong with me, man." And they're like, "Tony, I don't know either, but something's wrong with you because you should be living like we are." I would always kind of bellyache. At the end of it, when I did the math, right around the year 2000, there was a day that I woke up and I was renting. I was in an apartment, and I woke up in the morning and I said out loud to myself, "It's over." And I sat up in bed and I went, "It's over. It's over." And I kept saying it over and over again. And I'm going, "What? I don't even know what I'm talking about." I immediately cleaned my room. My work, I began doing better at work. I met my wife a few months later and stayed with her for 20 years after that. So it was like emotionally, and I explain it like this: like, imagine if our consciousness is a 5-gallon bucket of water, and they cloned me and they poured 2.5 gallons into the clone, and then they used it. And when the clone died, I got my 2.5 gallons back of my consciousness back into me, and it was me again, because my life kind of took those turns. And other people I've talked to have had kind of the same experience. In fact, that's one of the things that I do is I try to, when I work with people, is I say, there's an intake event and there's an exit. And I try to find, so when was the first thing that you remember? A lot of people, it's like 4 years old, 12 years old and then I roll the clock forward without them knowing it. While I'm talking to them, I write it down. So when was that? You were 4. When were you born? Okay. And I go, you remember seeing a gray in your house? Okay. And then I go, and I add 20 years to that. And I go, what happened there? What happened in 2000? Or what happened in 95? And they go, what? How'd you know? And they go, I saw there was something else. And then I got my new job, and I divorced my old spouse because they were abusive. And then I moved out west. Like, it happens all the time that there's a huge life event, and that 20 years increments exactly after they're taken, because it's probably the same technology. Like, our consciousness is probably the currency. Like, we are driving a meat suit, and they clone a new meat suit, and it doesn't have anything to drive it. So they borrow some of you and put it in there, and they go out and they're I witnessed thousands of humans building infrastructure throughout the solar system. And the years would have been through 87 through 2000 was when I was up there. So they were mining and building buildings. They were remodeling cities quickly. They had advanced technology. They were building quickly. They were building mining operations throughout the asteroid belt. These were huge corporations. They were using. I was in a barracks, and I was told there was something like 40,000 slaves, slave labor, that were living like me. There were men that were like me. There were women slaves, but they weren't doing the hard labor. They were domestic slaves. And there were about 250,000 people living inside the Ceres dwarf planet. About 225,000, I think, was the number they told me, and 40,000 of those were the slave labor. So when you think about that, the logic of that they could take, and then I heard it. The other thing that I heard that I remember, and I honestly think that this was one of the chief motivating things for me. They kept saying, "You're not going to remember it anyway." Because I would always say, "How could you treat somebody like this? How could you do this to me?" And they just, "You're not going to remember it anyway." And I think that I do, out of spite. And so I think that that's something that proves they were pretty high and mighty in their policy of doing whatever they want, because your memories are going to be gone. It's impossible. So I'm proof that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important. I think it's important because if we move forward as a species and we obtain that stuff, that technology publicly, we have to acknowledge the fact that people will remember, and they have to be treated as such. They can't be, if you think about, I think some very good people in our world right now, if they had access to the ability to make somebody not do whatever they want and then not remember, if you could give somebody amnesia for the last week, I mean, the abuse, we're on a slippery slope. I think I think good people would become very abusive very quickly. And that's what these programs are.
What'd you think?
I really enjoyed our conversation. I think he's a fascinating man. I think he's earnest, and I respect him being so forthcoming and being so generous with us. And wow, we talked for over 2.5 hours, and that was just barely scratching the surface. I could have, I had so many more questions that came up just even when we were talking. So it was great.
Yeah. Another reason to have him on. And I meant to say, but things just move too quickly sometimes, that he was saying something like, oh, you guys are kind of just focusing on me at 10, and most people want to hear about the lasers and stuff like that. But I was just going to say that I think that especially with material like this, it doesn't do it justice to just speed through it and just kind of touch on a bunch of really intense experiences without really fleshing out the context that it happened in and some of the nuances of what went on while this thing was sort of being set into motion. So I think I would rather have somebody on and go through the material slowly and really get more of an in-depth idea about what was happening during all of this than just, have an action-packed 2 hours that just sort of briefly dusts through a bunch of really intense and otherworldly experiences in a sort of haphazard way.
Yeah, and I didn't take him saying that as being maligning in any way. I took it more that he was saying that this was like an interesting interview because we weren't trying to just go to the sexy space stuff. Mm-hmm. I was, from a psychological standpoint, I was really wanting to kind of drill into his mindset when he was a child and really trying to kind of understand what that was like for him and his family, and kind of understanding the elements of what he was experiencing as a little boy. Because I think that's a fascinating part of what happened. Yes, of course, it's interesting to find out about the off-world stuff, but for me, the human element is the thing that really resonates with me, and really, I have my own experiences and, familial experiences that I have questions about. And so I think I was really fascinated and curious to know what his experience was like as a child. So, that's why I wanted to kind of dig into that.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to ask him a few things, but again, things move too quickly about, if I were to see a picture of him at 9 years old and a picture of him at 11 years old, like, what would be the difference in his eyes? Like, how would that show in just the way he presented physically in his life? And I also was going to ask him if after, in 2015, when all this stuff was coming back to him, did he explain it to his parents, and did that kind of make his dad understand why there was such a change in his personality after all of that happened.
It would also be interesting to ask him about CE5 and trying to connect with other species from other parts of the universe and other galaxies and other universes, because I've always had kind of an uneasy feeling about doing that. It's kind of like opening yourself up and not knowing what's going to come in to the other side. And Stephen Greer really kind of frames it that, you know, all alien life is very benign and benevolent and it's great. And I don't know that I necessarily co-sign on that. I don't necessarily believe that. So I think it would have been curious to, and that was one of the questions that I had to stop myself because I felt like you wanted to stop the interview. But that was one of the things that I wanted to say was like, what do you think about that? Do you think that it's okay to do these experiments and call out into outer space? Does that actually do anything? Should we be doing those types of things?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. I always want to ask, it's only a certain kind of interview or a certain kind of person that we'd be interviewing, but something that has to do with the cosmos.
Yeah.
And somebody, especially, you don't get a chance very often to ask somebody who's been off planet, like, about flat Earth stuff. Like, So what do you think about that? Like, you've been off, like, I want to ask people who remote view and who have remote viewed off planet, what they think about that, what the firmament, stuff like, so maybe in the next time we have him on.
For sure.
I definitely want to read the book because, I'm sure it goes into much more detail, a lot of the things that he was describing. And he does, kind of hits the same bullet points during a lot of interviews. So I'd like to know how to dig under that. Well, I feel like we did dig under sure.
that. And
absolutely.
I feel like we went into areas that from the interview I listened to, he didn't really cover those areas. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like it was interesting because we weren't just focusing on the off-world stuff. We were focusing on really kind of who he is as a person and how it's affected and influenced his relationships and his physical body. And another thing that I kept thinking was, I kept thinking about my mom and my mom's relationship with the military and my mother kind of looking like an alien and having these very clear blue eyes. And Tony has those eyes too. And it was just interesting to me to see him and feel this weird connection to him. And that can be disturbing when it's someone who's talking about, secret space programs and military and, black ops. And, it's like, I don't know where to unpack that sometimes because it's freaky stuff and it's not always stuff that is easy to address if you have any kind of questions or curiosities about your own life. Sometimes that can kind of hit too close to home, so I started to get that weird tickle in my belly that I get sometimes where I feel like I'm having some psychic energy is like flooding me and I get nervous. And so I found it so it stimulated so many different parts of my brain, and I just wanted to keep talking to him because it's such a deep subject. It's not like, he wrote a cookbook and we're going to talk about how he came up with a casserole recipe or something. This is stuff that has so many layers.
Indeed. I wanted to ask more about consent. Why they would ask people if they wanted to be a part of this program, and even take them if they say no, and how is that commingle with universal law? I thought that, you had to consent in some form or fashion, but maybe that consent happened, in between lives and during the contract writing or the life mapping or something like that, which would then make the question itself sort of redundant. But yeah, I wanted to go into that too. But again, the train moves too quickly, and it's hard to, by the time that, there was a pause, then that would have been irrelevant. But
it's not. I mean, I think where it's good for us, and I know you do this, is to write yourself like a little note, and then I like to circle the wagon back, and he was really able to do that, so we can keep those questions for our next interview.
For sure. And sometimes your wagons are long, so
I know. Isn't it great? We go far in my wagon.
On that note, that might speak to our delirium. Yeah, we had a pretty intense road trip the last few days of this week, and we're going to get married the day after tomorrow. So.
And I'm fasting too, so that always makes me a little loopy.
Yes, so we'll spare you, but we will also thank you for listening to this episode. Hopefully you got something positive off of it. I look forward to having Tony back on again after we've read his book, and that will for sure happen maybe towards the end of the year, realistically. I've got so many books to read, my God. But thank you so much for listening. Feel free to contact either of us if you have guest suggestions, praise or criticism or whatever.
Casserole recipes.
Casserole recipes, yes. I've had a very few casseroles in my short life.
You like my tuna casserole.
I love your tuna casserole. That's not a euphemism, people. So,
and I will share that recipe if you would like.
We should start a recipe exchange. One of our Discord channels on our server could be a recipe exchange. Why not, actually? You can do that by emailing me at themeltpodcast@protonmail.com or hunter-muse@protonmail.com. Subject line, tuna casserole recipe. And I will send it to you. It's golden good. Yeah, I can vouch for that. It's good stuff. All right. Thank you so much for listening. We love you all. Keep listening. Great, great stuff coming down the line.
That's right.
Kathy O'Brien is our next interview.
Yeah.
Jeez, what a couple to have together.
Yeah.
And we will see you on the flip side.
Hey, you in the back. We love you the most.
Yeah. Keep coming.
Ta-ta.
Fare thee well.
Meow.
To hear the full-length version of this episode, get access to exclusive and early episodes, and participate in our monthly Zoom meetups for as little as $3 per month, just click the Patreon link in the episode notes or visit patreon.com/themeltpodcast. Contributing financially will help to make this podcast my full-time gig that I can devote more time to and allow me to create more content. Other ways of contributing would be giving us a favorable review or rating wherever you get your podcasts, subscribing to us on YouTube, spreading the word wherever you and your tribe congregate, or just by sending us your positive thoughts and intentions. In a quantumly intertwined and holographic multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.